Hello, my name is Jonathan McIntosh, and in this video I want to talk to you about some of the instruments in a Javanese gamelan ensemble, and in particular I want to talk to you about the various gongs and cradle chime gongs that help articulate the structure of gamelan music. And towards the end of the video I'm going to talk about the drums in a Javanese ensemble that are very important for helping to regulate time in Javanese gamelan performances. So this is the two aims for the video. So we're going to focus upon issues to do with structure and time in Javanese performance, and in doing that, in talking about how these instruments support the structure of the music and help drive time and performance, we're going to talk about the individual instruments in this section of the gamelan orchestra and how and the various roles that they play in the ensemble. So Andy Sutton, who is a famous American ethnomusicologist, he defines gamelan, a gamelan orchestra or ensemble, as a set of instruments, and these instruments are unified by the carving of the cases that the instruments are housed in, or that the gongs are suspended from, and these instruments are also usually carved or painted or decorated in a similar way. So there's a uniform look to the ensemble. Of course, a gamelan ensemble is not just one. It's not just one instrument. It's the collection of instruments within an ensemble, and we're going to see those instruments very shortly on the next slide. Another issue that's important in gamelan playing is that all instruments and players are considered to be equal. Now this is very important within this ensemble setting because it reaffirms the fact that in order for the music to work, you need to have all the various instruments and musicians playing their parts at the right time in the correct manner. So the playing needs to be appropriate for the style of piece that's being performed. In reality, however, some instruments do play kind of leadership roles within the ensemble. And the drums that we're going to talk about towards the end of this video is one example of an instrument that plays a leading role in a Javanese gamelan ensemble. The drums help drive the music, help regulate the time, and help shift from various sections to a different section within a piece. So that's an example in a Javanese gamelan of an instrument that probably plays more of a leading role, but in rehearsals and in the way that the musicians relate to one another, no one signals out another instrument and says, oh, this is a solo instrument, for example. And this notion of equality and the focus upon ensemble playing comes across in another quote by the very famous Canadian composer and musicologist Colin McPhee, who lived in Bali during the 1930s and had to leave Bali when the Japanese arrived, just before the Japanese arrived in World War II. And although he was studying Balinese gamelan music at this time, he says of gamelan music in general that the general effect does not depend so much upon the excellence of the individual as upon the unity of the group. And this is a key point because you could have very excellent individuals within a gamelan ensemble, but unless everybody plays together in an appropriate way, the ensemble is not going to sound as good as it possibly could. And understanding how instruments play together is one of the focuses of this video. And now we're going to move on to talk about how the instruments that relate to structure play together in order to help convey the form of music. So gamelan music is not necessarily like Western classical music or Western pop music that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Gamelan music can have different sections, so it can be said to have a beginning, middle, and an end. But the important difference for gamelan music is that the music is cyclical. Okay, so the music starts, and then the cycle goes round, and then it comes back to the beginning, and then it goes round again. Okay, so you can have very short cycles, or you can have very long cycles of music. And the name that's given to this cycle, and in the literature you see it represented as a circle on a page, is the word Gong N in Japanese. Now if you look at the word Gong N, which is on the screen, you'll see that it actually contains the word gong. And the large gong in a Javanese gamelan ensemble is the most important instrument. It plays the least often, sometimes only once per cycle, but it's really important because the gong strikes at the beginning, and then it comes and marks the end as well. So the striking of the gong is simultaneously the beginning and the ending of a melodic cycle. Within ethnomusicology, the name that's given to the study of music that's cyclical in this way is colotomy. And colotomy comes from the Greek word kolon, which means rhythm or unit. And the name then given to the structure is colotomic structure. That defines the structure of various pieces in Javanese gamelan music. Colotomic structure is not just unique to Java and Bali, but you can refer to colotomic structures in Thai music, Vietnamese music, the music in Malaysia. So right throughout mainland and island Southeast Asia, colotomic structures are a very important organizing principle for traditional and traditionally inspired contemporary musics. Colotomic structures are demarcated or articulated in sound by the various suspended, that means hanging gongs, and also the kind of cradled gongs. So gongs that sit in kind of wooden boxes with cord in the middle of the box, and then the cradle gong sits in the middle. These cradled and suspended gongs are very, very important, and they articulate the structure of the music. And the structure of a composition or a piece of gamelan music in the Javanese context is specified by two important points that we're going to learn more about in the lectorial that runs alongside this video. So the number of beats that are in a musical cycle is a very important factor. And beats or kind of metric intervals, they're called gato in Javanese gamelan music. So you have, in particular cycles, you have various numbers of beats in a cycle. So you can have cycles of 2, 4, 8, 16 beats, for example, within the Gong N. And then, depending on the number of beats within the cycle of the music, suspended and cradled gongs are played at specific points within the cycles. And the positioning of these gongs and the number of times that they sound within a Gong N or a cycle then gives name to the particular colotomic structure. So it's the number of beats per cycle, and then the order in which suspended and cradled gongs are struck within the cycle that articulates or demarcates the colotomic structure. Now, this is a very famous depiction of a full or a typical Javanese slendro-pelog gamelan. Slendro-pelog refers to the two tuning systems that are used in gamelan music. And this is an illustration that comes from a 1980 book chapter by Margaret Cartomi. And you can see the various types of instruments within the ensemble. And in this video, I particularly want to talk about the instruments that are kind of highlighted in red rectangles here. So along the bottom of the illustration, you can see various hanging gongs within the large wooden frame, and you can see that there's a kind of wavy line that goes along the top of that gong stand, and that's a dragon, a naga, and they're very typical carvings for a gong stand. And then next to that, there's various cradle gongs in type of box type wooden frames. And above those in the illustration, there are several drums that I'm going to talk about. So the most important instrument within a Japanese gamelan ensemble is the large or the great gong, and this is known as the Gong N in Japanese. Gong N is also the name used in ballet, but we're not discussing Balinese gongs today. So Gong N are either usually positioned in the middle of gong stands, or sometimes you might see them positioned on the finials towards the end of the gong stand. That's pictured here in the slide. The gong is the most important instrument. The gong again, or it can be sometimes shortened to gong, is the most important instrument because the spirit of the entire gamelan ensemble is thought to live inside the back of the gong. So this is a kind of animist principle that is still very much alive and adhered to in Java. And because the spirit is believed to live in the back of the gong, gongs are revered as important spiritual entities within Java. So gongs are regularly given offerings of fruit, flowers, and holy water. And if a gong is ever washed, for example, that water is considered to be very special and kind of takes on the qualities of kind of holy water, akin to the Catholic Church, for example. And on the next slide, you'll see cross-section pictures of the gong. So you can see on the left-hand side, as you're looking at the video, the front of the gong. And you'll see that it's got a kind of sticky out bit in the middle, and that's known as the boss of the gong. And the boss is a technological development that's quite specific to gongs in Southeast Asia, and it allows the gong to produce a particular timbre or sound, and the sound ripples out from the center of the boss and then down the sides. It creates these waves of sound. And then you can see on the right-hand side a picture of the back of the gong. And the gong produces a very low sound. It's the lowest sound in the gamelan ensemble. Another important gong is the gong soken. And you can see in the PowerPoint slide, the gong soken, or soks, are pictured in the blue rectangles. And you can see that they are slightly bigger than the other hanging gongs there that we'll talk about in a minute, but they're smaller than the gong again. The gong sokens are sometimes performed at the end of cycles, particularly if the cycles are short. And gong sokens are used to sound the ends of these cycles just because the reverberations of a large gong can go on for some time, and in order that the sound doesn't continue and kind of mask what else is going on within the music, gong sokens can be used to punctuate the ends of musical cycles. And sometimes you might have several short cycles within a piece or a composition. So at the very end of the overall piece of the composition, before it's repeated, the large gong will sound. However, at the end of the various sections within the piece, gong sokens might sound the end of those cycles or those particular points. So it's a gong sound, and sometimes it's referred to as gong as well, but it has a slightly higher pitch than the gong again. Moving on from suspended gongs, which hang from rope or cord over the gong stand, to an important cradle gong. And the most important type of cradle gong is called a Condom. And you can see that these are kind of up-ended gongs. You can see that they have a boss on the top, which is quite prominent, and then the shape comes down like this, and then comes down like this. And this part, which is rather long down the side, helps create a sound that continues for some time after the gong is struck. So Kanong has quite a vibrant timbre, and there are various numbers of canon within an ensemble. The canon, in terms of the polytomic structure, sounds at moments of primary importance within the Gong N. So if you think of circles or the melodic cycle, the gong usually sounds at the end and the beginning of the gong structure, and then within the cycle, the canon will sound at points of primary importance. So in terms of the hierarchy of gongs, you have the gong again, the swoken, and then the canon. Talking about that notion of hierarchy of gong again, gong swoken, canon, the next kind of gong that is of kind of importance is the kanpul. And on the picture on the screen, you can see that the kanpul are the gongs in the middle of the gong stand. Again, within the blue rectangle, and there are swoken positioned at either end of the gong stand. Kanpuls are slightly smaller than swoken. They tend to create a rather kind of warm sound. The waves that are created by the kanpul tend not to sound as long as the waves that are created for the gong swoken and the gong again. Now, as with canons and kanpuls, sometimes they articulate key important points within the melody. And these, or at other times, they can also articulate important notes within the musical mode that is being performed. It's not very important that you kind of understand that at this particular time with this video, but it is important that you understand that kanpuls articulate points of secondary importance within the musical cycle. So canons articulate points of primary importance, kanpuls denote points of secondary importance. Two other gongs that are important within polytomic structure are kind of very small gongs compared to the kanpul and the canon. And these are two very small cradled gongs, and they're known as the katok, which is on the left-hand side of the screen, and the kumpiang, which is on the right-hand side of the screen. And if you look quite carefully at these two gongs, you'll notice that the shapes of the gongs are very different. If we look at the kumpiang, it kind of has a very similar shape to the canon. It's like a miniature, a baby canon. And that's because it's much smaller, it produces a much higher pitch than the canon. Whereas the katok, it doesn't have this shape at the top of the kumpiang, for example. It has this shape. It's flat on top. And this flat shape means that the katok produces a rather kind of dead or a dull sound or a timbre. And this is probably illustrated much more clearly on this cross section, which is taken from a figure in Benjamin Brenner's book, Some Music in Central Java. So you can definitely see from this one that the katok, which is on the left-hand side, has a flat top, which produces this dull, particular sound that's very important within the music. So just because it produces this dull sound doesn't mean that it's not important. It actually is very important within the music. And the canon cross-section here, so it's not showing you the kumpiang, but it's showing you the canon, and it actually makes the differences between the two instruments even more apparent. Katoks are important because they subdivide individual beats, and in some of the simpler gamelan compositions, the katok often plays on the off beat, so it's subdividing the beat in that kind of context. And the kumpiang is a small chime gong that's used in particular polytomic structures. And when it is used, it plays before and after the katok. But the kumpiang is not used in all forms of coatomic structure, and that's an important point to remember maybe at this stage. So we've talked about the various types of suspended and cradle gongs that are important for the coatomic structure. And it's also important to understand the mallets, or the tabu, or the panggul. Tabu is the Javanese word, panggul is the Indonesian word for mallet, because mallets and the way that instruments are struck helps to produce the particular sounds that these gongs produce. So for the large gongs, such as the Gong N and the Gong N, these large padded mallets that are on the left of the screen are used. They're incredibly heavy, and the gong is struck just below the center of the boss, that sticky out gold bit of the gong. For compoles, we use a slightly smaller padded beater, and you can see that on the right of the screen. For the Condom, the kutuk, and the kempian, they are struck with long wooden mallets or beaters that are wound with cord at the other end. And the top, or the boss of the chime gong, is hit with the wound red cord, as you can see from the picture on the screen. So you don't use the wood because that would create a kind of clap sound, as opposed to a nice round, kind of vibrant sound that's produced by hitting the boss of the gong with the round cord. So, other important points to remember about coatomic structure, and points that Benjamin Brinner brings up in his reading for this video, is that suspended and cradle gongs have very distinct timbres. Timbre is just the posh musical term for the sound that's produced by the instruments. And these particular sounds that are created by specific instruments struck with particular types of beaters help to articulate, demarcate the coatomic structure of Javanese gamelan pieces or compositions. These sounds that are produced by the gongs, the timbres, and the order in which gongs are struck within particular Gong N provide really important reference points for musicians. They signal the structure of the music. They also signal when a cycle is going to end or when a piece is going to end. And they also help articulate various elaborating parts and instruments that play faster moving roles within a Javanese gamelan. So it's kind of like the foundation upon which everything sits within a Javanese gamelan ensemble. And in relation to the wider performing arts, coatomic structures are crucial for dancers because dancers devise choreography, or they perform choreography, or in some cases they improvise within very specific structures or pieces, and it's the coatomic structure which is a kind of safety net within this structure. So they know how to move in relation to the music. They know how to move towards the gong or towards the kanong, and when to stop or when to become stationary, for example, in a performance. Moving on from suspended gongs and cradle gongs to talk about drums for a moment. So suspended gongs and cradle gongs are important for the coatomic structure. Okay, they provide that foundation. Drums help to regulate notions of time within a gamelan ensemble. And in the Javanese gamelan ensemble, drums are called by the generic name Condom. And there are different types of Condom. And these are barrel-shaped drums. And as we'll see from the pictures that will follow this slide, barrel-shaped means that the drum has two heads, one at each side of the drum. And because it's a barrel shape, one head will be slightly larger and the other head will be slightly smaller. So the drum tends to go in this shape. And within a complete Javanese gamelan ensemble, there are roughly generally 4 types of drums, although there can be more. And the 4 main drums are the Condom, the Condom Chiblon, the Condom Ketapong, and the Bedok. Gunding, in the context of Japanese gamelan music, and gunding means composition. It can also mean to sing or a song. In fact, it's important that you kind of know these various types of gongs, these various types of drums, within this unit. So let's talk about 2 of the drums, the Kendang Gunding and the Ketapong. The Kendang Gunding is the largest drum within a Japanese gamelan ensemble, and as you can see here, you can see the barrel shape. So the skin or the face of the drum that's closest towards the left-hand side is the large skin, and you can see that the barrel shape kind of tapers towards the left-hand side, and that's the smaller skin. And having 2 different size skins means that the drum can produce different size pitches. The ketapong is the very small drum that's sitting, well, would be sitting on the floor, but it's kind of floating in an imaginary space on this picture. The ketapong sits on the floor, and again, you can see it's got 2 different sizes of skins, and it produces higher pitches. So the smaller the instrument, the higher the pitches that are produced by it, and the larger the instrument, the lower the pitches. The Kendang sits on a very large stand, and this is important because so that the drummer can actually reach across and play both of these drums at once. So usually the Gending is played with the ketapong. There's a middle-sized drum, which is called the Kendang Chiblon, and it also sits on a stand, but it's smaller than the Kendang Gending, but larger than the ketapong. It often plays very fast, kind of improvised drumming strokes, particularly in relation to shadow puppet performance, and also for dance performances. Looking at a picture of 3 drums together, you can then compare the various sizes of the Kendang Gending, the Chiblon, and the Ketipong. And these are the drums from the Monash University gamelan here. The way that these drums are tuned is also very specific to the shape of the instrument. So connecting the 2 skins or the 2 drum heads are pieces of leather or kind of plastic type material, and these are the long kind of straps that go down the side of the drum. And then you can see in this picture that the arrows are pointing towards kind of loops, and these loops slacken and tighten the connecting leather or plastic between the 2 drum heads. So the more that you push the loop towards the big head of the drum, the large head of the drum, the higher the pitch of the drum. So you're tightening it and you're squeezing, you're drawing the skin out, and that creates higher pitches. And to slacken off the drum, which you should do after every rehearsal, you push the loop towards the smaller head drum, and that makes the skins relax and they produce a lower sound. The final drum is called the dog, and it's a very unusual drum. It's not played with the hands like the other drums we've been talking about. It's played with a beater, and in many Javanese compositions or pieces, it's not actually played at all. So it's used very sparingly for particular pieces, and interestingly, it's the only instrument or drum from a Javanese gamelan ensemble that's actually being appropriated in the Islamic religion, in Islam, sorry, and so it's used in mosques as a way to call people to prayer, and also as a way to signal meetings. And if an accident has occurred, for example, they will strike the vigil as a warning sign within communities. So this is the end of this video, and just to conclude, that we have discussed various issues associated with structure and time in Japanese gamelan music. And what you should take away from this video is the notion of call-atomic structure. And call-atomic structure refers to the cycles of the music or time in Japanese gamelan ensembles, and the call-atomic structures are defined by the number of beats in a cycle, which is called a Gong N, and the order in which suspended and cradled gongs are struck within that cycle. And we've also talked about the various instruments and the pitches that are produced by these instruments to denote the call-atomic structure. And we've talked about the various drums and the roles that drums play in helping to drive